Alright, hey everybody, this is me, the Undead Viking. I'm here with yet another episode of my creating your campaign world. Now, I was talking about doing these a while ago, and then I actually started doing them, and now this is the third installment to what I think is going to be like a 10-part series. There might be a bonus episode or something in there as well. This is my attempt at telling people how I create a campaign world and what I think is important as far as when you are creating that world and just how mine come together and like ultimately make sense to both me and theoretically make sense to the players that are playing the game with me. Alright, so I'm not going to go over anything I was already saying, but this particular episode, this is going to be about three major things that will affect your campaign world in some way. And this will be, like, depending upon the size of your world or the size of your campaign, these will have a varying amount of impact, if you will, but they will have some impact regardless. So the three things that I'm going to talk about right now I'm going to talk about like the government of the world that you're in, which, you know, government's probably like a bad word for it. I mean, this is just going to be kind of like the leadership of the world, who's in charge, who's making the decisions. The second thing I'm going to be talking about is going to be the magic of the world that you're in, and the third thing I'm going to talk about is the religion that is in the world you're in. Now, depending upon the type of campaign you're playing, these three things will have like varying levels of importance when it comes down to your creation. And theoretically, you could use what I'm talking about as far as this series. You could be using this information for, you know, a cyberpunk campaign, or like a Starship, like Traveler campaign or whatever. And so things like religion or whatever won't come into play as much in those situations. But in lots of those, in most campaign worlds, like this is mostly, I'm talking about D&D, so I'm kind of be focusing on that as far as that goes. That doesn't say that what I'm going to say here doesn't matter to other types of game worlds or what have you, but I think D&D is definitely going to be the one that this is going to be the most important to it. Alright, so government. Government, you know, I'm sure most of you, depending upon, well, I have no idea who's watching this, but I'm sure some of us definitely took some classes about government, whether they were in college or in high school, or even like middle school or junior high, as we called it when I was young. And I remember I took several like government classes in high school, and I even think I took one or two in college, if I remember right. But regardless, there's lots of different types of governments. The most common thing you're going to see in a D&D campaign is going to be some sort of feudal system. You're going to have lords that will control lands, and those lords will report up to, you know, like some sort of a baron or count or duke, if you will, and then theoretically that will continue up the chain until you eventually arrive at some sort of member of the monarchy, a king, a queen, perhaps a prince, you know, whatever. Most recently, like my last really big long campaign, the idea behind it was that there was this kingdom that had like a very fair and benevolent king, fair and just, and he had they wanted to take back this wild island / continent off to the west. There was a big long arching story. I think I even talked about it in one of my RPG videos I did a while ago about the story arc of it. So he sent his uncle, you know, to like, who was a trusted advisor type of thing, and they sent and like he was a baron, and they sent him to that land, and then that baron then recruited adventurers to slowly but surely take back that island, like from the creatures and the evil things that owned it. I mean, so that was like my government. Now there's a lot more to it as far as that goes, and I'm not going to really go into that story, but that was like the base bones of my government. You had a king that oversaw a baron, and then you had a baron who then eventually, like the PCs, like raised themselves up politically to the level of lords and so forth, and they owned lands and whatever. It was a very satisfying campaign for me to run. Now that's a very classic take on D&D and the feudal system, and it just kind of goes hand in hand. We kind of go to that medieval Dark Ages type of thing because of the fact that we use the weaponry that we use, the technology level we use or whatever is very, very much Europe, Middle Ages. I mean, it just goes hand in hand. You got castles, you got knights, you got I mean, just the whole range of what have you that just seems to fit for that. Plus, a lot of the source material that we get ideas from comes from novels from that era. They come from like the fantasy novels, the fantasy movies, or even the historical movies that we watch from that era, and then we see those things and they kind of inspire us. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that has to be the type of government that you're going to have run. You can have all kinds of things going on. I mean, the government could actually play a huge role in the story of your campaign. I'm not really going into the story of the campaign with this episode, but the story of the campaign, might be the fact that you have a corrupt government, or perhaps there is like traitors within the government trying to overthrow it, that type of thing. You also can have a very important thing where the two things I'm going to be talking about here in just a little bit, magic and religion. You could have, there's things called magocracies. It is a very, I don't even think it's a real term or whatever, but it's a term that, D&D campaigns or D&D worlds will use. It just basically, mages have a lot of control, whether it's direct or subversion or behind-the-scenes control over the government that you have. Go to like the First Law trilogy. Fantastic books. I highly recommend them to anybody who wants to read any kind of grim, dark type of novels. Joe Abercrombie, I think is the author, but great novels. The First Law trilogy. I mean, they talk about this order of mages, and then like the first order. I can't think of his name right now, but like he is like kind of like this weird power in the world where he doesn't draw attention to himself, but he does change things around. He causes influence into the world and tries to make sure that the status quo is kept up, right? But while the whole time, hiding, in plain sight, if you will. The same thing goes for like if you want to have a religious based government. And I forget what the name of that is, but I mean, you could actually go back to the fact when in the Middle Ages, the Holy Catholic Church. I'm not going to get into a big giant discussion about that, though. But there is historical background into where and even into this day, you can say that religions have a great deal of sway, a great deal of influence over governments all around the world. And once again, I'm not opening that can of worms. I'm not going into it, but I mean, you can definitely draw like parallels, whatever. So, as a matter of fact, the campaign I'm playing in right now, there is a church, the Church of the Red Queen, which basically controls everything. Somehow, even though my character has rebelled against that church and like openly defies it, my bard is still alive, which I think is actually kind of cool. But there we have us, and like in that world that I'm playing in, priests of the Red Queen, it doesn't matter if like what level they are or whatever, they are automatically like given the benefit of the doubt. They are automatically assumed to be telling the truth. They're automatically there's an automatic assumption that like they are like in charge, if you will. Both because of the fact that they can work miracles, and plus the fact that if you defy the church, you usually end up on the wrong side of the spear. So there's a lot of like fear and intimidation there, and so that kind of goes into like having a religious government as well. So when you're creating your campaign world, you've got your scope, you've got your the size or whatever. Remember, this is just even if you have just like a simple little valley that you're traveling through, or if you have like multiple multiple continents and places you go. Just take your time, take a little bit of time just to daydream about that stuff. Daydream about how it doesn't have to be super involved, doesn't have to be whatever, but you definitely can just take some time and think about, okay, you know, how do these lands be governed? How are they taken care of? You can go anywhere with that. You can go, you know, maybe there's a thieves guild that has a lot of power behind the scenes. You know, maybe there's towns like city-states that are just basically like, you know, their own entity and they control it, and they're powerful enough that they don't have to swear fealty to like kings or whatever. Maybe that's like you live in one of those city-states and like that city-state is always afraid of the fact that there's going to be like some larger some king, some duke, some baron who has their eyes on that city. That decides that, you know, it's like, they're going to take it over. That could be something huge behind the scenes. Same thing goes with having the religions or the magocracies or whatever you want to call them. How is them being in charge affect the world that you're in, and how big of a part do you want them to play? And like I said, it could be just a tiny little thing. Maybe you just say, yeah, there's Lord MacDougall. He lives in a castle up on that hill, and you never mention him again. But at the very least, then you have a basis of some sort of government, meaning that, like, you know, you have somebody in charge. That somebody in charge has like at least some sort of standing militia, standing army. There's a city guard. There's the Night's Watch, so to speak. The protectorate of the tower. You know, whatever you want to call it. You know, come up with whatever regal sounding name you want. But now you have a semblance, and again, it creates something that's tangible. It creates something that that world has, and try to do something like, as far as I've always been a big believer in, like, come up, like, and you don't have to draw it out yourself, but come up with if you have something that, like, if the city guard have them have a tabard, you know, like a tabard that is noticeable, and then, like, you know, Google search up different tabards that would, like, show off that. If you're gonna have different lords and ladies of the land, make sure that you have their, like, you know, just their colors and their flags and whatever, and just something that, you know, it's like, oh, you know, so when players then can have a callback to that situation, they can say, oh, it's you know, it's two axes crossed on a red flag, and they're gonna say, oh, that's, you know, and you can say, and you recognize that as, you know, the Dwarf Lord Tunken, you know, and you can just, and then that, once again, it creates that world being more real. So just take a little bit of time and put a little effort into that. Like I said, daydream about that stuff and just come up with it in your head. All right, so the next thing up is I want to talk about beyond the government. And I said the government first because it kind of goes hand in hand with the next two. The next one I want to talk about is religion. So religion, because of the fact that you're probably playing D&D, and because of the fact that you're going to have priest magic or clerical magic or whatever, and there are campaigns that just don't have that. If you go back to, like, if you can find it, you can find the old Midnight campaign book, which was this world, basically was the fantastic idea for a campaign world. But like the Midnight campaign book was the fact that basically, what if you had a world where Sauron won? That's the long and short of it. And so there were no clerics. There were no clerical powers. Priests, you know, they had their line to the other gods severed. And maybe the gods were dead. You know, they just had no control. And so, you know, there were other ways that people got healing. But I mean, but that in itself, even though you're saying, okay, you know, like, there's no healing, there's no religious, there's no clerical magic. Well, there was a clerical magic, but it was on the evil side. The evil clerics, of course, prayed to their evil god, and they were able to get things. But, you know, that in and of itself is a form of religion. You have dictated as far as what you're going to have. Now, a lot of people, like if you remember the old Forgotten Realms, I shouldn't say old Forgotten Realms. Forgotten Realms is still around, but there was a fantastic book. It can be a little tough to find right now. It'll set you back a little bit, but there was a great campaign source book, came out, now it's got to be like 20 years ago. That was Forgotten Realms, and it listed off like the whatever it was, 8,000 gods. I'm exaggerating a little here, but listed off all of the different gods that were in the Forgotten Realms, and there was quite a few. So you could have a huge pantheon like that, and you could run with it. Or you can go small, right? I've played in campaigns where there is like one god, or maybe two. The campaign that I'm in right now has basically, well, there's some evil gods that people worship, like these evil cultists that we run into who worship these. But other than that, there are basically two religious orders that you can worship. There's like this kind of benevolent god of death, and then there's the Red Queen. Those are the two things that you're allowed to, as a PC, to, if you are a cleric, those are your choices. So what you have is kind of like whatever you want to do. Now, if you want, you can pull up many different mythologies, many different pantheons, and you can go crazy. Like my buddy Andy, whenever he almost always will go with Norse mythos. It's just what he likes. He likes the story of Ragnarok. He just likes that as his go-to gods, if you will. It isn't always what he's done. I mean, we've had campaigns when that was not the case, but definitely that's something that's kind of something he goes. And I've always liked the Norse gods as well. I mean, obviously the Undead Viking, but I mean, I've always kind of dug it, and I've always thought it was a good set. But I mean, you don't have to go with that. You can, if you want to put some time and effort into it, you can create your own pantheon, which is like the last time I ran a campaign. I just said, I'm going to come up with 9 gods, and I'm going to have one god for each alignment. Lawful good, lawful neutral, lawful evil, and I just made one god for each alignment. And then came up with like kind of a series of like kind of like the favored weapon of the clerics of that order. It's like what were their holy days, what was considered to be their sacraments, things like that. That I created it. And once again, the more time and effort you put into that, the more your players are going to get out of it. And supply that information with them. Print it out. Give it to them. And it's like, so they have like sheets of paper that they can always refer back to when they're playing. And it's like, oh yeah, what did the god, the hero? Because I gave my gods like very generic names, like like the lawful good god was the crusader, the neutral good god was the healer. The chaotic good god was the hero, so it was just like, and so, what are the holy days of the hero again? They can pull out that piece of paper and they can read, okay, and then it's like a feast day, or it's it's like basically a beer drinking day, that kind of thing. And so they could look that stuff up and they could react to it. So it puts it, if you want to put some time and effort into it, go ahead, fine. But like I said, most D&D campaign worlds, if you're not creating one on your own, you can definitely just steal one. Standard D&D has a fabulous set of gods that you can use. But I find that if you take the time to create one on your own, you will definitely engender a little more. Not so much in and I can't guarantee your players, but you'll engender a little bit more enthusiasm in yourself, right? If you come up with those gods and create them, and then also like if you want to have some fun with it too. I mean, change up how maybe change up how those gods grant those powers. Maybe like one of the things in the campaign that I'm running right now is that the clerical magic is seen as just being like bona fide miracles because really they are, but the powers that the clerics are given, you pray, but then it's actually a random assortment of spells that the gods give you, because the gods are capricious and fickle, and the idea is that they're giving you the spells that they believe that you'll need for that day, and then in their great wisdom they've given you those abilities. And so the clerics are supposed to come up with the reasons why those particular abilities and whatever were given to them, and like come up with good uses for them. And so then our dungeon master actually like gives us, or not me because I'm not a cleric, but has given the players with clerics bonuses for coming up with, oh, in the Red Queen's divine wisdom, she gave me spell create food and water because of the fact that we were going to be traveling in the lower quarters of the city, and now I'm going to create a bountiful feast for these poor people. And then, okay, yeah, perfect. Then that's and so and then it adds a little bit to the world and stuff like that. So you can definitely like play with it and have some fun with it, and I encourage you to do so. Now, I mean, it's just it's one of those things where like, because of the fact that you have like character classes that are directly attached, like paladins as well, directly attached to the gods. I mean, it's something you should take some time and take some time to establish, so the players have that. All right. So the last thing I'm going to talk about here is magic. So this kind of goes hand in hand with the religions, because of the fact that there is religious magic and there is well, obviously magic. You have, depending upon the system you're playing, you have wizards, you have sorcerers, you have warlocks, you have witches, you have, well, there's tons of different classes out there that get spells in some way, shape, or form. Oh, and I should have mentioned, if I'm taking a step back into religion, don't forget about druids and rangers and things like that, because basically everybody always forgets about the nature magic people. I shouldn't say everybody, but they're very commonly forgotten about. But make sure they, the followers of nature and the worshippers of like nature, such as druids, get their fair shake as well, because druid classes are pretty cool, and I actually dig them. I dig them a great deal. But anyway, going back, so here we have spells, and we have spell users, and so like I said, wizards, sorcerers, bards for that matter, and so now you have arcane magic. So there's two things about arcane magic that I've talked about a great deal in other videos, and just magic in general. I think at some point as you're creating your world, you have to decide what type of magical world you want there to be. Right now, well, I shouldn't say it's like super popular, but right now there is like kind of a growing old school revival feeling about creating magical worlds, like grimdark or low magic worlds, and I am a huge fan of low magic worlds. I think that it makes the mages and the wizards that the people that wield those abilities, it makes those people stand out. It makes them be, like, and this is the actual like terminology of fantastic. They are fantastic. Not like, oh, fantastic, but I mean like whoa, that guy just created a glowing orb in his hand, and he threw it at that kobold, and then it killed him. I mean, that's like, ugh. I mean, if you saw that in real life, you'd be like, okay, I'm going to go away now. I'm going to go hide in my room. If a woman comes into the comes into your village or comes into your hometown, and takes a few moments and just creates light out of her hand, and to light her way as she walks from the tavern back to her home, so she can see. That's, whoa, that's crazy. Just like, how do you do that? That doesn't seem normal. So I like having that be as like kind of both amazing, but also very scary to the common person or whatever, because of the fact that that's using some sort of level of power, some sort of like, literally like the definition of arcane, like the just way weird ability, and then they're throwing it around left and right. I've definitely played in campaign worlds where like arcane magic was outlawed, and so like the wizards themselves, they would keep their spells, like they would never like actually. They try to hide them as much as possible because of the fact that they didn't want to be found out. I've also played in campaign worlds where it was just like there's a magic shop around the corner, and you can, if you got enough gold, you can go in there and buy a sword +2. It really depends upon personal preference as far as what you want. The nice thing is that it evens itself out regardless. If you play in a high magic world where, like, in any given day you look out your window and you just see wizards flying by, literally, because they've cast a spell and they're flying by. If the local dwarfsmith down the road, has on call a enchanter that is making shield +1s every single day, I mean, then everything in that world is going to be like that, and so that's fine, right? I mean, that because it's on an even scale. If your characters that believe in, like, throwing around fireballs and creating and having, like, loaded to the hilt with enchanted magic items and what have you, like, ever ended up in a low magic world, I mean, they'd be seen as, like, some sort of supreme beings because of the things they could do, and that could be kind of a fun thing you can roll with. You can create that. On the same side, like, you spin a 180, now you have a world where it's super low magic, just like and you never even it's like you heard stories about supposed magic items when you were young, but nobody's ever seen one. They don't exist. It's like that hedge wizard down the road says that he can cut a chicken up and put its guts on a plate and he can tell your future, but nobody believes him. They just think he's a freaking crazy hermit that lives in a tree. I mean, so, but if you ever were in a world where, like, all of a sudden, like, your characters end up in some long forgotten tomb, and somebody gets a hold of some stick that not only lights up when you hold it with both your hands, but if you hit somebody with it, it causes their head to explode. You're like, holy cow, what is this thing? And so that's the other spectrum of that. Now, of course, there's all kinds of stuff there in the middle. I'm somewhere in the middle of low magic where, mages exist, clerics exist, they cast spells, people recognize, but, magic is kind of seen as something scary. Maybe you shouldn't be messing with it so much. Maybe you shouldn't be so comfortable with throwing fireballs around. And people tend to, like, just shun or distrust magic users or wizards because of the fact that the classic Hobbit or whatever, it's like Gandalf was seen as a troublemaker, just like trouble seemed to follow him wherever he went, but it was one of those things where they weren't outright, killed on sight or whatever, but I mean, definitely people kept them at arm's reach or whatever. So that's a big question you have to ask yourself. What sort of D&D campaign do you want to run? And that's just personal preference. Like I said, my personal preference is low magic. I mean, because of the fact that then when magic does exist and magic is found, then it's just meaningful, and it's very potent, and it's very scary for your players, it's very interesting for your players, and it's also like a good plot point. But if you want to have a high magic campaign where, like, just you can start slinging spells left and right, and just and have these, like, wonderful magical effects and spell effects that will increase the enjoyment of the game and just make the game itself, like, just more dynamic and exciting, and not grimdark. Like I said, like, this grimdark campaign stuff is very, very popular right now, and I'll admit I'm a fan. But sometimes just like this whole, like, oh, the Middle Ages and everything's dirty, and you might die of the plague tomorrow, or somebody's gonna shove a dagger in your eye tomorrow because you looked at them wrong. At some point, that's just so gloomy and depressing. You have to let go. What if we just had a world where things were just kind of, like, a little more easy, and the fact that, like, my magic user doesn't have to, like, cover himself in dirt and offal just so he can pass as a beggar, so the city guard don't drag him outside and hang him from a tree. Just like, there's something to be said about not having it be so grim and scary all the time as well. So there you go. That is, like I said, the three things you need to make up your mind. You need to make up your mind about the government, you need to make your mind about the religion, and you need to make up your mind about the level of magic that you're going to have in that campaign. And then, like I said, have some fun with it. Change up some stuff with it. Change up how magic is learned. Change up how like clerics get their spells. Change, maybe clerics just have to make sacrifice. Like actually, like, you know, things where, you know, they you come up with, for each god, you come up with a certain thing where, like, oh, you know, it's just like, you know, your god happens to be like a nature-based god, so you need to, like, burn like some incense and berries and grain to your god at night, and then in the morning he gives you the powers, you know, that you have. Or like, if it's, you know, just have some fun with it. Maybe it's something where, like, you know, the whole thing with tithing, like clerics tithing, make that part of the whole thing, where it's like, oh, you know, it's like you worship the god of benevolence or something like that, so you need to make sure that you're keeping yourself poor, and so that your god continues to commune with you and give you those abilities and powers. And the same thing goes for arcane magic as well. I mean, like, you know, have some, like, ritual or something that they have to go through to have that done. And the more you put into it, the more, like, flavor you put into those things. Like, the more real your world's going to feel, and the more fun you're going to have with telling that story that your campaign's going to have. All right, so that was governments, religions, and magic. Figure those out for your campaign world, and make sure you, like I said, you write this stuff down. It goes without saying, write it down, keep it handy, and make sure that, like, if it's important that your players know about it, make sure you give them handouts or stuff like that that allows them to reference that as we go. So that was episode number 3. Stay tuned for episode number 4. I wish I forgot what episode number 4 is supposed to be about, but it'll be out really soon. So thank you, as always, for taking the time to watch this video. I appreciate it. And if you have any comments or questions or whatever, by all means, post those away. I'd be happy to answer those as best as I can. And, you know, just be the best version of you that you possibly can be. And just remember, you're awesome. I'm Den Dead Viking, and I will talk to you again soon.